Bryce, welcome back to the show.
Hey, brother, how are you? Thanks
It's
for having
good to
me.
see you. Oh, it's always a pleasure. I'm all right, man. I'm here. I'm here in Philadelphia. I was in lovely Vermont this week doing a live show, and that was interesting. So I'm back here, and I wanted to talk to you. We've been setting this up for like a week because there's a civil war on the right now among influencers and political media and cultural kind of criticism. And a lot of our listeners, Bryce, would not know what a groiper is. But you know what a groiper, you might even know some groipers. But do you know groipers?
Yes and no. So,
And explain to our listeners when I say, hey, there's a groiper. They're probably seeing them in their neighborhoods, right? And they don't even know.
well, kind of. Okay, so it's a small group of people. And by the way, I want to just start at the outset. I want to level set. There is not a civil war.
Fair.
There is right now conservatives and far right nut jobs that James Lindsay, who gets excoriated regularly because he'll go out on a limb on something. Dr. James Lindsay, and he's a good friend of mine. And in fact, we were talking last night a little bit, and he's going to come on the show, and we're going to do a fire show on this and talk a lot about and you should have him on your show, and I'll hook that up. But early on, he came up with this concept, and I think it's beautiful, but it pissed everybody off. And he talked about, okay, the coming battle right now is going to be between the, conservatives and what is now the woke right. You heard the term the woke left, but now we have the woke right. And these are the people that will style themselves as, some of them will take on mantles that, hey, I agree with, like America first, right? I'm an America first guy. This is like, hey, put on your oxygen mask before you put it on the kids. Right?
Sure.
We're the big brother country. We've been paying and footing the bill for everybody. We need to stop doing that. Right? We need to be wise with our foreign aid. There's a whole bunch of waste, fraud, abuse, all those sort of things. Look, let's take care of the American worker first. Let's, bring manufacturing and vital industries back here. All that stuff is America first concept. Make America great again. All of that is like, okay, who can really argue with those things? I don't think anybody with good sense can, right? But then these mantles get put on, insane individuals or people that are, white supremacists, people who, really truly have, racist positions or, positions that like Christian nationalism. Okay. I'm not a Christian nationalist. I'm a Christian. I believe in America first.
Right.
I'm not a globalist. Right. But I'm not going to put on that label because the people that are putting on that label are people that believe that we should have a theocracy. They're gearing themselves in a similar way that maybe an Islamist would. Okay, so you have this crowd, and oh, by the way, they're being ginned up intentionally, and there's CCP money. I mean, straight out CCP money that's going into fanning the flames of this fight. There's the Donald Trump MAGA coalition was incredibly strong. We won the popular vote. We, really crushed it in the electoral college. I mean, we trounced the Democrats. The Democrats generally are waning right now in this culture. They've got their own problems. I mean, they advocated for, men and women's locker rooms and, all of these sort of things that a sane person, right, does not believe that men can get pregnant. A sane person does not believe that there's no difference between the physical prowess of a man versus a woman, right? So all these sort of things.
Yeah, I have a friend who my friend Bill Bohr, who I just did a live show about Christian nationalism in Vermont. And he had this great quote this year. He said on our podcast that the margins have become the center in the culture. Yeah. And so you have these things, whether it's this sort of what you're talking about, the woke right, or whether you're talking about the folks that Bill Maher would say are allergic to intuitive common sense things, right? It's like the Seinfeld episode, do the opposite. And that is driving, I think, in both parties. I think a lot of people feel this way, right? That the margins are driving the conversation.
Well, because it's loud.
Yeah.
And you're hearing what's loud, where most of us, we've talked about this before, there's these margins, right? Most of us kind of operate our lives in a pretty similar fashion, and we want what's best for people, and we want to, do our jobs, and we want to thrive and have prosperity and get along with our neighbors, right? That's generally us. right? That's why you and I can have a great conversation and have some real differences. But yeah,
Absolutely.
but that's not what's dominating right now. But so the woke right, because I want to define it, because James Lindsay, I mean, he got temporarily canceled. He got taken off of stages all across the U.S. where he was speaking regularly at conservative groups. He was speaking regularly at all kinds of things because he's anti-communist, he's anti-Marxist. But what the woke right is doing is they are using Marxist tactics. They're using divisive tactics. They're using all of the same things that the left did. They're just wearing a conservative mantle, let's call it, right? And they're adopting, we have power now, so let's crush the opposition. Let's put in laws into our culture that don't allow really liberty. And liberty is God's idea, not man's idea. I don't want to change my left-wing masters that were shutting down the world in COVID and telling us that we couldn't say the word retarded, or I don't want those people in charge, but I didn't get rid of them so that I could have these people in charge.
Is that really hell you want to run around and say the word retarded?
Sure, yeah, it's a great word. It actually has a meaning.
It actually has a great meaning. To slow. It does have a meaning to slow, right?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I talk about some of these ideas. The euphemisms that we created to be sensitive and non-offensive have complicated and made our language clumsy. You can't say the word retarded. You have to say mentally disabled or handy capable or whatever. You then take one word that meant something that schoolyard kids would make fun of their friends, right? They weren't really attacking somebody who was intellectually challenged. They were making fun of somebody, right? Now the kids in the schoolyard are like, "What, are you mentally disabled, dude?" I mean, they just will use whatever, right? And then, we got to move to a new, more complicated word or more stupid sounding word. And so, that's why I'll say something like that. And it's tongue in cheek, obviously. And
when Doug Wilson says in the Ross Douthat interview, he says he wants to say tranny, right? He wants to say it, right? I mean, there's a provocative nature, right? It's transgressive, right? You kind of.
Well, sure. And the new transgressive is the conservative, and the new transgressive right now is a conservative Christian that doesn't give a flying flip about these things and is willing to face criticism from an audience that thinks, Bryce, we don't say that, and we don't clap now. We snap because there's people that are assaulted by loud noises, and clapping can be assaulting. It's like,
I don't know those people. That's interesting. I've never heard of that.
There was a great clip of this like communist meeting where everybody was like, hey, I need you guys to stop this, please, because it's not, and people are getting up on the microphone and they're, like, okay, comrade. And, and the whole meeting devolved into them like talking about how sensitive they were to certain things. And you have to respect this for me because I need, it was ridiculous. That clip, I'm sure some of your audience has seen it. It was laughable. We've gotten to be nuts, and we're letting the patients run the asylum. I mean, that's what's happening right now. There is not really a civil war, but you have people like the, comic Dave Smiths and the Candace Owens and the Nick Fuentes and yes, the Groypers, which I'll explain. Those folks are the loud voices right now that are, by the way, competing for the youth who are coming up and know something's wrong, something doesn't feel right. We've gotten a raw deal, and here these people are blaming it all on Israel.
The head of the Heritage Foundation, though, said, and we'll get into the Groper thing in a minute, because I do for our friends when they're listening who don't know what it is. I do want to define it for them. But you had the head of the Heritage Foundation. His name is escaping me now, but he came out with a statement that basically said, when Tucker had Nick Fuentes on, and he says, we don't cancel people, right? We debate people, we challenge people, which I don't really think Tucker really challenged Nick Fuentes much, but then he makes the statement, and apparently internally in the Heritage Foundation there was a lot of conflict, right? Because the older folks, the folks who were like over 45, they were furious that the Heritage president made this statement, and they thought we've been getting anti-Semites and things like out of the movement for years. The young people were like, no, wait a second, why are we canceling? Why are we censoring Tucker? And is there room for me? So it does seem like there's a generational divide where folks who are a little older found this insane that Tucker would platform Nick Fuentes, and then it was a love fest. I mean, I watched it. I was just couldn't believe how there was just no kind of critical interaction. But the younger folks, there was more sympathy to that. So what's going on with that, and what's a groyper?
Okay, so a groyper. Let's define that. I mean, it's a loose term for the alt-right white nationalists that Nick Fuentes and his crew. I mean, they're responsible for that term. They use the Pepe the Frog meme, and largely, by the way, they're a group of somewhat skinny, effeminate incel types, involuntary celibates that are young in their early 20s and 30s that are running around as fans of Nick Fuentes, who's a gifted communicator, gifted in expressing ideas, says things, touches on things that are like, yeah, I kind of agree with that. He'll talk about white supremacy, right? When what he's really talking about at its core is really Western supremacy. Like, I'm a Western supremacist, and let me define that before everybody goes ape. I think that the peak of our prosperity came from Western ideals, right? The Western underpinning,
I mean, like kind of a fusion. You get this biblical tradition that fuses with the Greco-Roman sort of philosophical tradition. It universalizes the biblical stuff.
It's that crossroads between the Greek, Greek and philosophy and the Bible.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah, that informed the world framework as we know it, right? And we've got very distinct lenses that we look through everything, and it's that Western culture that we look through everything on. And it's been the most prosperous, the most safe, the most liberty oriented. Every culture can kind of exist within it.
Capable of the particular universal tension. It holds a lot of tensions together in a creative way. Yeah,
exactly. And by the way, it's really largely informed by Christianity. There's no freer nation than a Christian nation. And by the way, that gets us in trouble because we're seeing the rise of Islam and all of that in communities, and they are taking over right now. And they are, it's a slow push that's been thousands of years at this point of struggle. So we're what is inside Western culture is also the seeds of destruction because we're just too nice. And I don't believe in being nice. I believe in being kind. And there's things that we should not allow within Western culture. For instance, I believe that Islam is incompatible with Western culture. So, I mean, look, Nick Fuentes says some of these things.
You don't have a problem, right? Like with Muslims being in America or something. But you have a problem when they don't recognize certain norms, like when they say you can't satirize the prophet, or you can't, like when they want you're saying like T.S. Eliot very provocatively, but I think, I just actually quoted this in the live show. He said that when he's writing about Christian society, he's like, it's not that it wouldn't be pluralistic. He says, but we'd have Jews and Muslims and atheists, but they'd be Christian Jews and Christian Muslims and Christian atheists. And what he meant there was
their operating system. Yeah,
their operating system is this system. And within that operating system, they have freedom of expression. They can go to the mosque, they can go to the synagogue. But their operating system is this sort of Western norm that you're talking about.
Yeah, but see, they're looking to overthrow Western culture. Yeah. I mean, now, does that mean your neighbor down the street that, says he's Islamist, like a neighbor down the street that says he's a Jew, but it's not really Orthodox? But their orthodoxy is to overthrow us. I mean, it is something. They're not a religion. They're a peaceful religion when they're a minute portion because they have to be. But once they start owning neighborhoods, once they start to, get on city councils, become the mayors, you look at what's happening in London and Paris with all these no-go zones where they just start to wholly take over communities, vote in their own, build their own sort of structures, then pretty soon that's not America. That's not Western. And they are, ignoring our laws. I mean, you have here in America happening right now, there's physicians that are operating on young girls and doing clitorectomies here in America right now. And it's known. It is known in these communities, and nobody's going to go in and touch it and enforce. That's an evil, wicked practice, but it is a part of their religion. I'm part of the Council for National Policy, I'm on their board, and it was a think tank that was conceived and developed in the Reagan administration, and it deals with the existential threats that we face to America, and they then help to get policy and things like that put in. They have a policy that they're trying to get passed in every state is America's laws in America's courts. Because what's happening is a Pakistani guy will come in and say, well, I'm allowed to do this because this is my culture. And then they're convincing the judges to go, okay, well, I guess we have to, 50% is the only value of a woman's testimony compared to the man. Okay, I guess we have to take those things into consideration. That's happening in our courts right now. And there's examples that we can point to. And so that we're getting laws passed that, no, you cannot enter that into our court system. Well, this is their culture, so we're going to operate within this. No, we're Americans. You came here. You are. We used to have this idea of assimilation, right? So, all of these things, what happens is Nick Fuentes will say some of these America First things, some of these things that are important, some of these things that we kind of go, oh yeah, that makes sense. He'll talk about Black people and he'll say, about Black fatigue, and he'll go, hey, if a group of Black patrons comes into a restaurant and Blacks are known for tipping huge and they're known for like, wow, serving them is great. People would jump over themselves. Oh man, give me the Black table. But instead, culturally, there's issues and they're known for being poor tippers. They're known for being loud, obnoxious, all these sort of things.
These stereotypes. He repeats these stereotypes. And I've heard him say, and then him say basically, there's this clip I watched. I followed some Groyper folks on Instagram so I get access to this stuff. And he's like, all right, let me just tell you, women should shut the hell up, okay? As so should the Jews, and Blacks should be like in prison for the most part, and then we'd have a paradise. I mean, he'll say things like that.
Yeah, and then he'll say, I'm just joking. Yeah. Yeah, so what he's doing is, he's destabilizing, right? He's taking, and the worst types of, let's call it propaganda, whatever. The worst type of ideas are the ones that have seeds of truth, things that you can resonate with, that'll pluck little chords in you. That'll be like, yeah, man, I saw, a group of obnoxious people the other day. They were Black. Therefore, I can kind of get that, right? And
you wouldn't want to say it, and you wouldn't want to say it because you're like, it's kind of prejudice. It's a stereotype. It's this, but then he says it, and it validates the feeling you had because he's not.
Hey, I'll say the truth right now. There's problems within the Black culture that has been allowed
in every culture, right?
Yeah, but it's been allowed to proliferate because they can say, oh, that's racist. Don't tell us that we need to have fathers in our homes. That's racist, And so we stop calling, and by the way, they're doing this with Islam. They're telling us that, if you criticize the dictates of Islam or some of the things you're an Islamophobe. And they use that stuff as a shield. It's like criticizing teachers and cops. They put them on a pedestal. And then so you're not allowed to say, oh, there's some awful teachers and there's some awful cops. It used to be that kind of stuff that, oh, there's this, all cops are heroes, all teachers are heroes, all teachers. No, they're not. It's like any other profession. There's most of them are mediocre. There's some that are great. There's some that are terrible. Sure. It's like anything in the world. We should be allowed to authentically criticize anyone and everyone, regardless of skin color and all that stuff. But Nick Fuentes will take these things and he'll take the idea that, hey, right now, Muhammad is the number one name for a baby in Ireland. Well, I think that, Ireland should be filled with the Irish. Okay, that's true. We should have multiculturalism, but we should also have places that we get to go where there's distinct cultures. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with wanting that.
Or at least you have to, it forces a conversation of what do you want to have, right? And so if you want to have a Western liberal culture, right, it's probably, and you bring in a lot of Muslim immigrants who are not Westernized, who don't understand liberal democracy, you're probably not going to preserve that kind of culture. Now, if you don't want to preserve that kind of culture, if you're saying, hey, that culture is old school and it's too traditional or whatever, then okay, get in a bunch of people that don't want to preserve that culture, and that will happen.
Yeah, and it is happening, and it's happening all over the place because, again, they've adopted the same things that we've adopted here in America now, which is that lack of an expectation of standards for behavior and assimilation. And hey, if you're going to come here, I mean, remember Ellis Island, we needed people to come over here, right? We needed this country to thrive. We wanted to import people. That's what immigration and all that stuff is about. But it was about this strengthening the country. It wasn't about taking care of the immigrant. It was about strengthening the country. And then that philosophy flipped under Ted Kennedy largely to where it was just like, hey, let's just have everybody come, right? And with no expectation. But they used to like, do you have a job? What are you doing? Are you skilled? It was like there was expectations. And then, oh, by the way, the beauty
like Canada does, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Canada is like almost impossible. I mean, to get into Canada as an immigrant, the standards are unbelievably high.
Yeah. And by the way, that's a beautiful thing. It's like you don't have a good thriving company if you just hire anybody. You want to hire people with skills. You want to bring people in that are going to contribute to whatever your mission is. And we left that mentality a long time ago. And Europe has been doing that forever. And I believe that a lot of this stuff has to do with some bad liberal thinking. Okay. Some idealistic thinking, some confusion that we all look at things the same way. Oh, everybody's basically good. I mean, that idea and that worldview, which is an anti-Christian worldview, people aren't basically good. And if you put them in, if you just give them money, they're going to behave correctly. If you just take care of them, or if we give everybody UBI, they're all going to be poets and singers.
You see this in the Second Iraq War, right? Where Bush thought, if you just topple Hussein, they're freedom-loving people, and they'll just set up a liberal democracy.
They'll just want democracy,
right? Right.
And that, by the way, that was a uninformed worldview that we also thought about China. We go and we set up a bunch of business there. We do this. We get cheap labor.
That free markets will lead to free people and free. Yeah.
No, because there's culture, and culture is so powerful. I mean, you cannot really escape it unless you have intentional leaders within that culture. And the Black culture needs that now. They need to quit being married to the government and on the dole of the state, and in encouraging single motherhood and men to, flee their responsibilities. That is, that's what dismantled it, because you look at Black culture prior to that. And remember, we talked about this, Charlie, people took him out of context when he was saying, hey, the civil rights movement was a problem, because it should have been on one page. It should have been only about race. It should have eliminated all of these, evil laws. But what they did was they hoodwinked the Black community. I mean, that's why I'm more of a Malcolm X guy than I'm a Martin Luther King guy. Malcolm X said,
you heard it here first. But.
Yeah, Malcolm X, said, hey, don't trust the white liberal. They're going to enslave you just a different way. And they did, and they fractured Black culture. We should be allowed to have these conversations. So Nick Fuentes, back to him, will dip into some of these things that we all kind of in our hearts are like, yeah, that bothers me too. Or, okay, there's some truth there. And then he'll suck these young men in who are seeing that, some of the boomers fleeced, our treasury, stole their futures and made it harder to own a home, made it, put us in massive debt that their grandchildren
guys that are losing at the dating game. I mean, Scott Galloway, who's running around a book tour today, he said that, it takes, I don't know where he's getting these numbers, but he's a pretty smart tech guy. He said the average, normal looking guy, maybe he's a 6 or whatever, like me, not that great looking. And he takes them, 2,000 or 200 swipes to get one coffee date. And then often we'll get ghosted, right? And so this is just, so like this, when you have these guys that are that lonely and that frustrated, that a sort of rage machine like Nick Fuentes, you get off on that, right? Because there's some place to displace the rage.
Yeah, and so these guys...
I'm not blaming women. I'm not saying, women, but these social realities are complex.
Blame modern dating apps, because, I mean, look, 10% of the guys get 80% of the chicks on those.
Exactly.
And those, and
they don't all do, those women. Don't all do 250 push-up workouts like me, Bryce. I mean,
that's right. That's right. Or me, man. I did some legless rope climbs the other day.
You're an Adonis. You're an Adonis.
Well, so I takes one to know one, brother. I look at what Nick's doing, and by the way, those groypers, if you want to see them in person, I mean, they all have the same. They wear ill-fitting baggy suits because they don't have the brawn to fill them out. They all are wearing they'll wear the MAGA hats. They'll come in sometimes, and there's kids that aren't part of that have the same look, because unfortunately we have the early andropause effect going on in men, and low testosterone, and bad environment, and too much social media, and all these things that are making these kids less manly than we've ever had before, less masculine. I mean, look at a 19-year-old in 1950. Versus today. I mean, it's night and day in the way that they just visually look. So these guys will come in, and they are these, largely these, weakling types that Nick Fuentes, taps into that chord and that nerve in them. And they're, shouting.
And for those of our listeners who don't know Nick Fuentes, I mean, you could of course Google it really quickly, but he is kind of a frail guy, right? He's not a guy that looks like he does any strength training. He's got this kind of
and he's got, kind of gestures that, and there's been rumors about his, sexuality behind the scenes. There's been, things over the years that they've attacked him with. I don't know all the truth of any of those things, but he's a incredibly gifted communicator, very, very brilliantly articulate. And so he can tap into that. He's quick. He's very smart. So he can dive into that and has a, big following of these disaffected, involuntary celibates, and they're bummed out. And so you'll see them in a group, like they would come to TPUSA events, and they would try to do different, symbols and different things in Charlie's pictures. And I was, one of Charlie's security, close protection guys in the early. And so I would stand in a photo line, and I would stop those guys from doing some of that stuff, and we'd kick them out. And because they'd try to be like, oh, look, here's, Senator Johnson with a groiper. Everybody takes pictures with everybody. Hey, can I get a selfie? And then people are like, here he is.
Right.
Charlie Kirk with a groiper. Oh, exactly, Charlie is secretly in favor of Nick Fuentes. And, they would play those sort of games, right? And so Charlie would be like, hey, if you see these guys doing any of this, stop them. Stop the photo. If you see them trying to sneak in these little, messages, get rid of them, because Charlie would then get attacked. And we would kick them out of events regularly. They would get up and they would say racist things, and they'd ask Charlie questions about, they'd pin him on an Israel anti-Semitism thing, or they'd try to do that. And so it was like this tiny little irritant that would always exist. And you're always going to have those people in mainstream movements that are good and powerful and crushing it. And we had those guys, routinely try to infect the TPUSA movement, and they'd get booted out.
But wait, and this Lindsey Graham gets up like this week, I think it was this week or the end of last week, at the RJC, the Republican Jewish Committee, and gets up there. I think he was a little drunk, but he got up there. He says, "Hey, everybody, I'm from the Hitler sucks wing of the Republican Party," which I'm thinking, is there a Hitler doesn't suck wing? So this is where I'm wondering, where the Civil War language is interesting, because apparently there's enough infection that around the anti-Semitism and the sort of nativist stuff and other stuff that Lindsey Graham, United States Senator, has to go up and say, I'm in the Hitler.
Yeah, because we have a cancer, and we're trying to prevent it from metastasizing. We don't have a civil war. We have a cancer within the conservative movement.
And right now, just for the people that are listening that don't know about this, so we have this Nick Fuentes and the groipers who we're talking about, who were on kind of the fringes. And then you have Ben Shapiro, who's one of the major figures in conservative media, and he's a pretty remarkable communicator as well.
He is.
He and Tucker have this falling out over Tucker platforming Nick Fuentes. I mean, Tucker has Nick Fuentes on the show. And again, I don't have a problem with him having Nick Fuentes on. The problem is this sort of blanket endorsement, this sort of not asking him anything critical.
Yeah. I mean, I would have Nick Fuentes on if he came on my show, and I'd press him, and I'd press him hard. I think Patrick Bet-David had him on. I listened to it, and Nick is being platformed, and I don't disagree with the idea of platforming these guys, because I hate that term even. Look, let's have these guys talk, and let's pick apart their dumb ideas.
Things get worse in the shadows. When you push it in the shadows, it metastasizes. It gets worse.
This guy's got truth. That's why they're not letting him on.
Yeah, exactly.
No, let him on, and then push back on the lies, because he says a lot of obvious lies.
So Megyn Kelly has Tucker on, and she seems kind of pro Tucker. Ben Shapiro is frustrated. Is that, you know, Ben Shapiro has this big falling out with Tucker. They used to be closer. So now you have this Mark Levin is out there who is a pretty prominent conservative media figure and a very good entertainer. I listen to Mark Levin. I think when he's like MSLSD, the New York Slimes, I find that guy so entertaining. But so these guys are all, and it's largely over Israel is the hot button issue and Zionism, and then there's this, but there's also this sort of Rothschild. Yeah, it's on the left. I had this guest I had on the podcast, Sarah Hurwitz. We were talking about it yesterday. The left, the anti-Semitism in the progressive side of the left, they'll say it's Jews, right? They'll just say it's like we're trying to make this great multicultural utopian society, and it's the Jews, right? She would say on the right, it's a little more veiled. What happens is we're trying to, you know, make America great again and get back to our roots, and the global elite, the elites, right? Like she's like, look, if you're a Jew, you hear it's that insert Jew here, right? like whatever. So a lot of it is around anti-Semitism, around a support of Israel and that sort of stuff. That is what all this conflict seems to be around. And then, and to what degree are things that used to be seen as uncouth or racist or prejudicial with the Israel stuff, some of that is led into the discourse and stuff like that. So that's where I think people are writing think pieces and stuff about a seeming civil war. You're saying it's not a civil war. It's sort of the margins at the center and a cancer.
Yeah, and you've got people that had incredibly powerful and popular programs that are pushing it and rewarded by the algorithm and rewarded by CCP money that is fostering this stuff. Okay, we have, and we've talked about this, I think originally on your show. Like I always say, they want this. They want to see us divided. Who is they? It's the global elites. It's several people that are all rowing in concert. By the way, it makes me it's faith affirming to me, because I think the only guy who can orchestrate this kind of evil is the great enemy, capital E enemy, right? Because he's getting. I mean, how do you get Muslims aligned with LGBTQ? You know, I mean, how do you get Mandami?
Queers for Palestine is
how do you
one of
get
the
that?
most fascinating.
They'd be thrown off of the roof. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, they can't exist freely in that society, but yet they're campaigning for them. I mean, it's bizarre. The only way is to have, you know, this great Satan, you know, like I think ginning some of this stuff up and getting everybody to row in concert. But you have global elites that benefit from chaos, right? And can take more money out of our treasury in chaos. You know, a strong America is not good for the globalists in the world in the same way. You know, they want to have everything be fractured and destroyed so they can remake it in their image. These are the central planners that want to accumulate all authority to themselves. And that's the world that we're in. And are there nefarious Jews that are a part of some of those global elites? Yeah, of course. Are there nefarious Italians? Yes, of course. I mean, you know, are there bankers and old money families and billions of dollars that just, they don't think the way we think, and they just think about how they can capture more power, and you know that all exists. And then they take the useful idiots like Candace Owens and the comic Dave Smith, who every time Dave Smith gets pinned on a lie or something that's not true, he just goes, "Hey, I just don't want dead kids," you know. And it's like that's his little escape hatch every time. Hey, I just don't want dead kids, okay? You know, I just think that we shouldn't murder babies in the, you know, it's like, okay. You know, I mean,
you just mentioned Candace Owens. Candace Owens used to. She and Charlie Kirk, who you knew quite well, were close. I mean, I've seen videos of them singing Ignition remix in the car and hanging out.
Yeah.
And they were buddies. And then she now is saying that Charlie, that there's a murder, that this is a murder conspiracy. Obviously, there wasn't murder, but that this was a political orchestration. Israel's involved, all this stuff. She and Shapiro. I mean, Shapiro kind of originally gave her start, right? I mean, and
Charlie did. Oh,
Charlie did. Okay.
Yeah. So she was the communication director of TPUSA when it was a little baby organization, right? And her and Charlie went on tour and did those campus tour events. Remember the whole thing that Charlie got famous and recognition for was, you know, going to these college campuses and challenging their ideas and speaking to these kids. And And in the early days, he would stand around with a little microphone like the, man on the street kind of a thing, and get yelled at and screamed at and spit on. And he would challenge what the university was teaching these kids. And then here comes this one and only singular Black female conservative. I mean, that is like a snow leopard, right? Incredibly rare. She's smart, a quick, talented communicator. Beautiful. I mean, she's charming, charismatic. I mean, I've met her several times. I met her, Jocko Willink, when she was working for PragerU, came in to be on her show. And, I brought my family out and we all met her. I wanted to, hang out with Jocko because he and I started jujitsu in the same month, in the same year. We've been training for the same length of time. And I was, enjoying his rise and thought he was brilliant. My girls wanted to see Candace, and, we took photos, and she could not be a more charming, charismatic, lovely, beautiful individual. And that was 2 weeks before the shutdown. And, the world all went, extra crazy. So, but what Charlie has class. PragerU has class. Daily Wire and Jeremy Boring, maybe not so much. But what happened was Candace would use a platform. Candace is about Candace. And what she's doing is the same thing she's always done, is she's chasing the money, the algorithm, the fame. And she's the kind of person in a lot of ways will say anything to promote herself. And Charlie, would still have her come on stage. A couple of years ago when she went, in this whole like Zoom into, the anti-Semitism and the Jews are responsible for all the evils in the world. I mean, no Jews, no news. I mean, this is all, you look at her entire feed. She's trafficking on Charlie's death right now. She is pumping up every conspiracy theory, obvious lies too, by the way. I mean, this is such a coincidental thing. I had a, doctor's appointment, right? And I meet this doctor, and I'm going to leave him out of this, but I meet this guy, and he finds out, this is shortly after Charlie's, death. And we connect on the fact that I've got a show and I was on Charlie's board and he loved Charlie and, all this stuff. And so we had a moment. He calls me a few weeks later and he's like, hey, I just need your advice. Candace is highlighting my son and his friend who were members of a sports team in Utah. They were dressed similarly and she was calling them the decoys. And because these, and so she's,
Wow.
She's pumping this up, and who are these? And boom. And then everybody's running and they're trying to investigate to find out who these kids are because they look the same. And, they were roommates, members of the same sport team, wearing the same soccer clothes or whatever, right? I forget the exact sport. And so this guy's distraught. He's like, it's going viral. My son's worried, this other family, and they're all stressed out. And Candace is pumping it up like they did something wrong and they're a part of this big conspiracy. And she's trafficking in that stuff and she's blown it up. I've got it in front of here. She posted the other day, this TP USA verified lies that she did on her show.
Wow.
And I've got it right here, and she's attacking Pastor Rob McCoy right now, okay, intensely. There's things that are going on, around about him, some that are complete lies, right? The reason is because she immediately came out, and right within minutes of, like Charlie's death, she started saying stupid things, and very compassionately, Pastor Rob, who's known her, met her, they've been in the same rooms together over the years. He said, hey, don't do this. Charlie would never dishonor you this way if the roles were reversed, right? And he said a very compassionate statement. People can look it up. There was nothing wrong with what he said. And so she viciously goes back. This is her thing. And, she'll attack, me if this stuff gets to her. And she'll send all of her, people to attack me and, say all kinds of things, whatever. That's what she does because, she got some criticism and she's a narcissist. So she got built up by TPUSA, left that platform, for greener pastures. She parlayed it into something else. Hey, people make career moves, no problem. She could make more money elsewhere. She went over to PragerU. Okay. I had Dennis Prager's company party in my backyard. I'm very close to that organization. That's why I was behind the scenes, getting to watch her show and have my kids meet it, right? She then betrays them, uses them for a while, goes and lands a more lucrative deal. And on the way out of these things, she didn't do it nice, She is a self-aggrandizing, self-promoting, all about money kind of a person, and stabbed friends in the back. And Charlie never said anything. I only recently have said some of these things because I'm disgusted by this rise in the trafficking of irresponsible conspiracy theories. Now, I think that there's, things to question. I got no problem with that. I think we should push the investigation and the prosecution to uncover whatever we uncover. There's questions that we have about some of these things that don't add up. I mean, I'm okay with that. But she's doing this for money. She's doing this to reward. And then she's like pumping up, how close she and Charlie were. They were not close for a while. Okay. And so I'll hit a couple of these things that are, she said in here. So I want to hit one. So Rob McCoy, after Charlie's death, that the Sunday following, he does a sermon and he says, Mikey, the first call to me was from Mikey, his son, who is Charlie's chief of staff. The first call was to me, and Mikey was covered in blood. And now, look, Pastor Rob is a gifted and wonderful communicator, at the pulpit. Sometimes he embellishes. All right.
Sure.
The
Ministers
video wasn't
there.
there.
You're a preacher's kid. Ministers do this.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a preacher's kid. I get it. Right. So he, embellished, and, I've seen Rob embellish before. Okay. He was a particularly, that dude became who he is because he was one of the first people to keep the church open in California, stand against the government, and win. And he did it, beautifully. He was a mayor of the town at the time, had to resign. He was particularly made and particularly courageous during the time of COVID. And that's what God made him for, I believe. Right. And he was also beautiful in Charlie's life, and they had a friendship, and Charlie considered him his pastor unequivocally. And so, Candace, I mean, again, she's using this stuff to blow herself up. Now, Mikey probably, immediately Mikey walks over, gets on the phone. Who is he calling? Well, he called Erica. We know that. He did call Rob. We know that. The order of was Rob the first call, the second call, the third call. I know that he called Rob because Rob sent us a text message to our group, which was a group called Fight for America that Charlie formed, text group that includes board members like myself and a few very close confidants of Charlie's. And it included his pastor, his chief of staff, Andrew Colvette, who's his producer, Tyler Boyer of TPUSA, leadership folks, all that. We're all on that one text thread. It still is going on today. We still communicate over it. And minutes after Charlie's death, we received from Rob, Charlie was just shot in the neck in a campus event in Utah. Please pray. And we all went praying. And then, we were all like distraught. And then I see the video. Oh my God, he didn't survive this. I could just tell. And silence and crickets on that group text. I knew he was dead. I knew based on that. I was holding on hope. I was holding for a miracle. But anyway, so she's picking apart these things. Number two, she says Charlie was a committed evangelical who only liked Catholic architecture. She's saying that that's a lie. He was moving towards Catholicism, is what she's saying. He was about to become a Catholic, and he was going to Catholic Mass, is what she's saying. Had he been to Catholic Mass? Yeah. He stated over and over again, he's an evangelical Christian. He also loved, like I do, some of the traditions in Catholic Church. He also he was one of the rare guys that had a Eastern Orthodox pastor on and asked him about Eastern Orthodox, because what is growing right now is hardcore Latin Mass Catholics.
Yep.
And Eastern Orthodox. I
follow two Instagram followers who are power lifter Orthodox priests. These guys are
because there's a distinct masculinity.
Absolutely.
There's
the beards.
Catholicism. You go to Latin Mass anywhere, it's the same.
Yeah.
There's tradition. He did appreciate the reverence that they had for the buildings. They're not done in dumb warehouses that are made for social media and filming and all that stuff like our churches are. Hey, we love the windows. I joke all the time that I'm becoming a Catholic for those reasons, right?
Yeah, I go to the Episcopal Cathedral downtown for very, very aesthetics.
It's awesome. So
let me switch
but remember,
gears
she converted to Catholicism. So she
gotcha.
wanted Charlie.
So she wants.
Yeah.
We've established Candace's own self-interested and kind of wacky. Let me ask you this: with the cancer and the infection and this sort of view, this view that there's this harsh, anti-Semitic, maybe maybe the immigration stuff borders on just not policy but animus or something, and these perceptions. I mean, I saw a poll. I heard a poll this week that it was on the Hacks on Tap podcast. Pretty sophisticated political professionals. They were saying that the number of Americans who want immigration slowed went from 55 when Trump was elected to right now it's in the low 30s. And then they had another interesting poll that folks who say immigration is a net positive went from when Trump was elected in 2024, like the polling was at like 52% or something, and now that's gone to 77%. And then you have the Democrats overperforming in the recent election, right? I mean, interesting because they win, in Virginia and New Jersey, those races they significantly outperformed Harris. Now, Trump wasn't on the ballot, so I mean, I think that's it. He was for the Democrats, but he wasn't for Republicans.
Right.
Do you think that some of what people perceive as extreme, out of the mainstream, that's existing in conservatism in the Republican Party, do you think that's hurting politically right now?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, but what you're talking about, like with the underperforming or, the Democrats, showing up more or whatever in this, that's normal.
Yeah.
That happens, every
off year
time.
Elections.
Yeah.
Off year elections.
That's, and by the way, that's our, kind of government, tug of war, that tries to keep us in these parameters. You don't want one party to get too powerful. And we had a very powerful coalition. So, we have foreign.
I mean, what the Democrats wanted, right? Trump was forming a working class, multiracial coalition. That's what the Democrats have been trying to forge for years. Trump sort of organically forged it, but it looks like it's teetering a little bit. I mean, the Hispanic up in I forget which county it was, in North Jersey. The Democrats were thrilled at the Hispanic to share the Hispanic vote they won, just because the last election for Democrats, I mean, if you listen to Democratic pollsters on podcasts, it was alarming. I mean, that was a shock to the system.
No,
and there was almost inevitable
fractured and destabilized them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would get shouted down in liberal when I would quote these Democratic pollsters, and I'm just saying this is what's happening right now. Like, and people, why it's got Europe, they would just get so mad. And I'm just telling you what's going on from Democratic pollsters. But I was surprised at just how much things slid in this off-year election. No, it was a small election. It wasn't the midterms. It was a small election.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering where do you think things are going? Do you think the sort of calling out of Tucker by people like Levin and Shapiro and folks, will that stop the bleeding? I mean, how do you deal with the cancer? Do you cut it out? Do you irradiate it? Chemo? Like, what do you see as a guy that's in the heart of the movement? What do you think the treatment plan is?
Well, I mean, what we're doing right here, having conversation to return to sanity. I mean, I don't want to give the Democrats ideas, but if they were to get off of, there has been a vibe shift. Okay. We're no longer accepting, men in women's sports. We're no longer accepting some of those really crazy adopted positions that moved the Overton window so far to the left and allowed the Democrat Party to be the coalition of, baristas with blue hair and the LGBTQ movement and the communists. I mean, I think that we're going to see some real destruction in New York at the hands of Mamdani, which, by the way, Mamdani is a Trojan horse for Islam there. That's why he lied to everybody and, pretended to be somebody that he's not totally, and got this coalition of communist useful idiots to all think that, wow, we're Democrat socialism. No, I mean, government run grocery stores and all that sort of stuff is straight out of the communist playbook. It's not Democrat socialism, right? Rent controls, all those sort of things. In New York, you have 700,000 people who make $1 million or more saying that they're leaving the state. For every one of those people, you have to have 10,
I have a lot of friends,
regular people.
They're pretty connected in New York, and I have a friend who's a pretty successful business guy, and he was telling me that he's actually going to meet with Mamdani with a group of business guys, and he says the guy's in for a rude awakening because New York mayors just aren't as powerful as he thinks they are. First off, New York City is kind of a ward of the state, right? And so they have to go through Albany for so much stuff, and none of this stuff's going to happen. I mean, the free buy, the grocery stores, this. I mean, this is the rent. I mean, the rent control, you might get it for a year or two, but that would kill affordable housing, right? I mean, it would. You wouldn't. I mean, you just can't. Even as someone like Ezra,
you're going to have a lack of backing for the police. That the mayor is directly influential there.
Yeah.
You're going to have a rise in crime. You're going to have people go, forget this. I was thinking about moving to Florida. You're having more and more financial centers build up, like big, strong little financial centers around the country where New York used to be the only one. You're going to have, more people move elsewhere. And then, it kind of spirals, and you're going to go back to 70s level crime. And, the end strength, to borrow from a military term, of the New York Police Department is already at an all-time low. Morale is at an all-time low. Those guys are going to, get worse. You're going to have less and less really effective policing.
Do you worry about the whole vertical video thing that someone like Nick Fuentes, right, or someone like Mamdani, who is a junior assembly person, can rise to prominence so quickly, or Fuentes can get kicked off of YouTube and it doesn't even hurt him because of the mastery of vertical video? And it's like this medium seems to throw people into prominence that in previous generations just wouldn't have been able to.
They would have been at the kids' table,
right?
They would have been at the kids' table forever. No, I mean, you don't have serious people rising to power. You have people that have. I mean, people don't understand. If you've never been a executive, okay, a grand decider in a business enterprise, somebody who's making these decisions on behalf of very complex decisions on behalf of a lot of people in order to build a company or whatever. If you've never, if you don't know what that means, there's people like, oh, CEOs don't work hard. This roofer over here, that's hard work, because they're confusing, there's different natures of work, right?
Sure.
And knowledge work is still a very important and hard and exhausting thing. And people don't understand these guys work, 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And to be an executive, I mean, it's an obsessive, all-encompassing thing. So a community organizer or a junior council person who rises to prominence because of social media doesn't know how to put that together and will not be able to lead because there's a different skill set there. And so all of these guys that are gifted communicators don't have that.
Being different than being a senator, right? Somebody like Bernie Sanders can be an effective political voice in the country and move the Overton window on something like healthcare without doing anything in the Senate. I mean, he's never passed, I don't think, co-sponsored.
He never did anything in life. I mean,
well, he was a mayor. He was a mayor in Vermont. I was just in Vermont.
That's like Pete Buttigieg. He's never really done anything of prominence. And when he did have a big job, he's failed. I mean, he was a small town mayor, but he's a gifted communicator and he was gay. So they're like, oh, we'll put this guy up.
Incredibly gifted communicator. Pete Buttigieg is one of the best communicators, and that guy can go into Fox News. So can Gavin Newsom. I mean, Gavin Newsom can go on Hannity. I mean,
Gavin Newsom's a sociopath. I mean, that guy doesn't even sweat telling the most egregious lies on the planet. I mean, I've never met a better liar than him.
He will struggle, I think, because first off, he's won a primary. He's won the primary of 2025, right? Which doesn't get you anything. But I also think winning statewide in California does not make someone a strong presidential candidate, right? Because you just have not. It's not like winning statewide in Pennsylvania or Michigan, where huge swaths of the state are red, right? And you've actually got to learn how to communicate with people outside your. I mean, California, you just don't need a Republican vote to win, and so you're just not going to be primed.
Yeah,
we saw this with Harris, I think, right? You're just not. I mean, I'm not denying that
you're always preaching to the choir in California, and now he's going to have to get a broader coalition. That's why he had Charlie on his first
and that was a great episode. I have liked him,
and he's lied
had
since.
Steve Bannon on and other,
He told Charlie his son was a fan and all that stuff, and then he immediately flip flopped on that after Charlie's death, and being asked, and well, he's not really a fan, blah, 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 And there's going to be an endless flip-flop reel constantly of Gavin Newsom. He then, ran away from the LGBTQ extreme and pretended like he wasn't the guy that was promoting all that stuff and promoting the perverse laws in California and the separation of parents from their kids in California. I mean, egregious things that guys like that pervert Scott Wiener was promoting all the time. I mean, he's pretending like he wasn't in charge of wrecking San Francisco. I mean, how on earth did California promote the guy who ruined San Francisco and made the poop map completely brown to let's promote him to governor, and now let's consider promoting him to president so he can, ruin everything. I mean, it's wild. I think that, Newsom will have a horrendous time, and I hope that he's the guy, because he's a good communicator, but he is a unrepentant liar. And although he has nice hair, and there's a lot of even conservative women that this is why I think we should get rid of the 19th Amendment, because even conservative women have kind of been like, I kind of like him, I'll vote for him, because he's handsome, he's got nice hair.
Get rid of the 19th Amendment. You don't mean that.
No, I don't.
You don't mean that. Okay.
No,
I just for my liberal friends, he did mean that. He's joking.
I do like to point out that bad decision making by women have created a little bit of the downfall of our society.
Well, a lot of bad decisions for a lot of bad people. Okay, but there's bad.
I'm just looking at voting numbers. That's all
genders.
No,
let me ask you this.
I attack vegans and liberal women all the time.
Yeah, Rod Dreher, who is a pretty prominent guy on the right, wrote the Benedict option. I think he came up in the American Conservative publication. He recently said that he wrote to he said that a friend of his who has connections deep in the Republican Party estimates that some 30 or 40% of young staffers work Roy-fers. Now, he has no data there, right? But of course, and this is just him spitballing. But that's remarkable. But when I pair that with this observation that in the Heritage Foundation, the old school folks, the over 45s, are saying you can't defend Tucker here, and the young people are kind of like, oh, we like the Tucker head on Fuentes, and we like the conversation. I mean, is that I mean, those things seem to be indicative of something, right? That something's moving. That there's something, just like I would say on the left, there's something in these protests, right? In the Israel protests, I was like, something's happening here. That's not. It may seem extreme, but it's not completely marginal. I mean, this it doesn't strike me as completely marginal here. The Groypers, the Fuentes, it seems like it's in the mainstream DNA to some degree.
Well, here's what I think is in the mainstream DNA. So, the greatest thing that Charlie did, and Charlie's legacy, was that Charlie shifted the young men towards conservatism and Christianity like never before. And you're seeing that in the numbers of those that are graduating
Trump
high
said
school.
He was the number one responsible person for his 2024 victory was Charlie Kirk.
And that is true. And oh, by the way, that's true on more than just, Trump's opinion, but Charlie and TPUSA had boots on the ground, like 1,500 people in areas where the low propensity voters need to be pulled in to vote for Trump. And they did a great job in all those battleground states. And Trump outsourced that operation to TPUSA because the RNC was so ineffective and such a broken and stupid organization. So TPUSA became the new RNC. And by the way, one of the only times that Charlie went around lobbying was when he was trying to get, Rona fired from that position and put in Harmeet Dillon. He lobbied at the RNC like crazy at, kind of the height of Charlie's power. And they continued to put her in place and ignored Charlie. And Charlie came back to all of us and said, that's it. We're going to be the new RNC. And then we did that and created effective campaigns and absolutely crushed it. So Charlie was the one that was responsible.
Did the RNC understand what they were missing. Like when Charlie Kirk feels like he's got to do that, right? He's got to go have basically an alternative power structure because they're so out of touch. Did they know how out of touch they were, or were they
Well, a lot of
oblivious
people
to this?
within it were, but there's all of this, all this politicking within those old organizations. There's established people. There's a bunch of, old boomers that are supporting it that think that, well, this is the way we always do it, and this is the way we're going to do it. There's people who can't adapt to new strategies. There's, you get that you look at all the old people in Congress right now, that was the dying off current power structure that existed within the RNC as well. And all these ineffective people that were, propped up and had these prominent roles, but never did anything and just collected money. I mean, Charlie, he, was aggressive. TPUSA was aggressive and young and youthful and full of energy and playing offense, not defense. Charlie always talked about that. And the Republican Party was always playing defense and not going out and advocating strongly for ideas. I mean, in my opinion, I think we have the best ideas that have stood the test of time. Old problems require old solutions. That's generally what conservatives are there and believe. New problems require new solutions, right? But we pretty much have the way that world should be running, the way America should be running. We pretty much have that well ensconced. And they, didn't sell those ideas. The RNC and Republicans and conservatives generally are poor communicators of the best ideas in the world. Part of that's because our ideas don't fit on bumper stickers, right? They're complex solutions. We all identify the same problems. I had a liberal guy on the other day. This is what Trump is
great at, right? America first fits on make America great again.
That's exactly right. He's a marketeer.
These are the things that he. Yeah, I want to ask you about one other thing. The Epstein files.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my take on this is one of Trump's biggest political mistakes was to come out and say, not to say that we're not going to release them, right? Like that. I mean, you can spin that a lot of different ways, right?
Yeah.
And Trump can spin anything. But when you come out and say it's a hoax, okay, I feel like that's like your rabbi getting up and saying, at Yom Kippur, hey, everybody, just telling you the Jews weren't really in Egypt ever. Or this is your pastor getting up on Easter Sunday saying the bones of Jesus were in the grave. I mean, this is part of the religion, right? The idea that there's the conspiracy, the powerful elite, the people that are behind the child porn rings, some of it rooted in fact, some of it not. But this is at the heart of this story that Trump got Trump elected. Right? These people are not for you, the elites. And the Epstein file, that's part of it. They get to run around, do whatever the hell they want on these islands. For him to come out and say something, violate the dogma, what was he thinking?
Yeah, so, okay, here's what I believe, about the Epstein file. So I do believe that this was because, we know time immemorial, there are tactics that are used to gain power. Okay. There are tactics that are used by intelligence agencies that I believe are evil, by the way. Honeypots, a honeypot, has been used forever. Wine, women, and song. What's this guy's weakness? Oh, let's bribe him. No, that doesn't work. Oh, hey, he likes the ladies. He likes them young.
Yep.
We got this, and there are billionaire class of people, very extremely wealthy people. Like, why would you think that a billionaire would, for 1 second, the idea of a prepubescent child or even a extremely young woman. And I do think that there is a difference between prepubescent, like pedophiles,
and a 17-year-old, right?
And a 17-year-old.
Physically, there's just a different,
Yeah. And in different points, we picked 18, as an adult here in this world. It's somewhat arbitrary, right? And I'm not, by the way, saying that I endorse, getting together with young women. Okay.
Right.
I don't, I think that if
it's predatory, but it's a different, it's a difference in a pathology if you're into if you're doing things
and I think we should be honest about that. Instead, they're playing this game that leads you to believe that they were, diddling prepubescent kids. And there's people that do that. There's people have, and by the way, I think it's all perversion. So I'm not excusing anything. I'm just saying I believe there to be a material difference in that attraction that somebody would have. You're broken sexually. and you are deeply broken sexually, and I believe that pedophiles that are interested in young kids, I don't know that they can be reformed, rehabilitated. I'm more of like, hey, the consequences of that behavior is death. Okay, that's what I believe. Now, can you be forgiven and go to heaven? I do believe that, but I still think that there are due penalty for these things, and I think death is that. I think they need to be removed from society. So that's my position on that, wavered from that. I believe that we should know what's in the Epstein files also. I believe that that should be released, and I'm a damn the torpedoes kind of a guy, okay? So let's know all about that stuff. I think we should. But what I believe is happening is the elites that got caught up in that. And I was mentioning billionaires. Like, why would a billionaire be interested in that? Because a billionaire can have anything in this world.
Absolutely.
And
Lord Acton. Right.
And by the way, they have pretty much had anything they ever want in this world. No pleasure is forbidden them, right? Go on down the line. I mean, the billionaire level money is so mind-boggling for us. I mean, I'm a wealthy guy, right? I've been blessed in this life. I can get a lot of what I'd like in life. Okay. I don't lack for anything, but that billionaire level resources, you just think differently. And so these are people that their appetites have never been satiated. And there's some that are wonderful billionaires that I know personally. They're amazing people that are morally virtuous.
Sure, of course.
And then there's people that the accumulation of power, the accumulation of pleasure, all those sort of things. I mean,
Jesus talks a lot about money for a reason. It's corrupting. Can be a really corrupting.
It can
force.
Be the love of money, right? And so there are people, the love of money, the love of power, the love of resources. Nothing's forbidden. So all of a sudden, here's this. Nobody else can do this thing. Nobody else gets to fly to this private island and have a bunch of young underage girls massage their shoulders and do whatever else, right? And so there, I believe, was a concerted effort that is not just Mossad and the evil Israelis, but it's multiple intelligence agencies benefited in concert. Our intelligence agencies link up. You look at the British intelligence agencies, the American, the whole entire the Western world, and some of the Russian, the old KGB guys and all that stuff. There's all this negotiating, all this stuff that goes behind the scenes to accumulate power for the elites, to strengthen nations and all that stuff. I think you open up those files, and I think Trump and everybody else sees these details in some of this stuff and sees the sickening stuff that's in there and just went, let's let this die. Let's bury this. This might be too destabilizing for the universe, right? That is at least my take. And I have, I've had family, people who are the intelligence agencies. I've, going way back. I know a little bit about how these folks think and, the Game of Thrones that everybody's playing, that's the world that we're in. So I again, being a damn the torpedoes guy, let's let that chaos reign supreme. Let's get the pedophiles, because there are actual prepubescent pedophile weirdos, all over the place too. Let's route those people out. I think that there's no more sickening crime on this planet than taking advantage of prepubescent and young girls and abusing them and all that stuff. I mean, I think it's a great, great evil, and they should be hung. So,
there you go.
It's complicated.
Bryce, this has been such a great conversation. I always enjoy talking with you. I learn a lot, and thanks again for coming on the show and educating me and my listeners.
Yeah, anytime, because, man, I think we scratched the surface of this one still.
Absolutely. I'll have you back on.
All right. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.